In this video lesson, we're going to talk about how to take a framing plan that you have sketched out for a deck and begin to bring that into AutoCAD. And as I mentioned, the first thing you need to do is kind of work out all the details and have a sketch. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but it has to make sense to you, and you've got to have a game plan going into AutoCAD so that you're not making all of those design decisions in CAD. You certainly can refine some things, but you need to have the general idea of what you're trying to do in CAD. I've got mine set up here. It's a 24-foot deck that protrudes out into the rain garden. It's 44 feet long along the sidewalk in this particular example. We're also going to look at some example plans for how to begin to represent this. I want to break down this one for a boardwalk specifically. In the plan, you're going to start with your post right here, and we're going to show it with an X because we're seeing that post come up, and we've got the end grain in there. For this particular post and beam connection, it's a platform framing where the beams are sandwiched to the side of the post. And you can see right here we've got this angle right here and this angle right here. I'm sure we're calling it out somewhere on this plan, but that is the right here. You can see it. That is the joist hanger. So the joist is actually coming into the side, and that bold line represents the hanger right here. And what's different about this than other decks is that they're using the joist on the outside and attaching it to the post as well. It's a lot of connections in the same space. Sometimes tough to pull off, but this is what's called a rim joist that hangs out on the side. So we've also got the joist coming across here, and we're showing blocking in between. In this case, it's a 2x10 to match the joist, which is a 2x10, and that blocking in there just to kind of keep this nice and rigid. What's also on this plan and would also be on the decking plan that we're working towards are these individual decking boards. Now, if you were to do this over the entire project, what you'd find is that it just covers up all the framing. You wouldn't be able to see anything underneath. And so what they're doing here is they're showing the individual boards just in a section, and they've got this swooping line on this side, which sort of implies that it continues for the entire length of the project. And so you can see they're calling out the boards. They're calling out 2x6 pressure-treated deck boards fastened with parentheses 2. That means 2 is the total, 2.5-inch number 10 galvanized deck screws per board, and string gear crossing. And so string gear is just going to be this sort of joist connection right here. So at each place where the board crosses a joist, we're going to have 2 screws that are 2.5-inch number 10 galvanized deck screws, and that we want to have a 1/4-inch spacing between these. So all the details in the notes. This is a really great example. This break line means that it just keeps going in both directions, but a really solid example for us that we're looking at for our inspiration as we begin to bring this in CAD. Now, what's going to make my life a lot easier is I'm going to rotate my entire drawing to fit this angle right here, and to do that, I'm going to start with UCS, click on the line, click again on the line, snapping to it, and then click above the line, and that rotates my crosshairs. PLAN, and then hit spacebar twice, and it's going to rotate our drawing to get everything set up so that I can turn on my ortho and begin to put in my elements for it. To start, I'm going to just draw in my first ledger board that's actually going to go right up against the sidewalk here. I'm going to draw it out in space just so I can see it. And I'm going to go up 2 inches. I'm going to go over 44 feet, and we're going to go down 2 inches and over, again, 44 feet, or I could just hit C space to close that off. And so I've got this first ledger board drawn in. We're going to draw everything with the nominal value, so a 2x4 is 2 inches by 4 inches, even though in reality the actual size of it is smaller than that. So we've got this 2-inch board, and we don't know what it is yet, or I haven't actually sized it or looked at my notes to label it. We're going to do all that a little later. Before I'm drawing everything on layer 0, I want to create a new layer at this point. Create a new layer, and we're going to call this, we're going to call it a beam, even though it's a ledger. I'm going to put all my beams on one layer. I'm going to put all my joist on another, and that's just for ease of working. We'll put our post on one layer, things like that, just so we can turn them on and off. So I'm going to say beams right here. We'll change it to, I'm just going to pick a color green for now. Make sure I select that. And I'm going to grab all of this and put it on my beams layer. You might also consider grouping these things. I'm not going to worry about it just yet, but what I want to do is I want to center my deck between these 2 lights, To do that, I'm going to grab a line and just put it right there. Grab my ledger, and what we'll do is we'll pick it up in the midpoint. So I just type MID and hit space, and it just snaps to the midpoint. And then I'm going to type MID and hit spacebar again and snap to the midpoint of that line that I just drew. That means that I'm snapping the midpoint of my ledger to the midpoint of that line. Now I can pick this up, move it, and move it down perpendicular. So I'm not snapping to the midpoint of this line because that would be somewhere down here, just the midpoint of my line that I drew and subsequently deleted between those two posts. Got my first ledger. I'm going to go back to my notes, and I'm just going to have these in front of me, but you might have them on a separate sheet of scratch paper. And the first distance that I'm going to push out is I'm going to create a line right here, and I'm actually going to draw this line out 12 feet. And this is going to be my first run of post. This will actually be the center of my post. I'm going to draw this line 44 feet over to match the dimensions of my deck. And while this isn't going to be a 12-foot joist, this is going to be the line that I snap to for my post that are going to be 12 feet out. We'll go another 12 feet in this case, and that's going to be the end of my deck. Now, that's not where the beams go or the joist goes. That's just the overall dimension. I'm going to kind of work back from that. You'll see that my joists are actually going to be a smaller piece because I'm going to have 4 inches for the post and then 2 inches for each of the beams right there that are sandwiched on the side of it. So let's draw this first post, and what I'm going to do is just draw it 4 inches. So we'll go 4 inches down, 4 inches over, 4 inches up, and I'm going to hit C space, and that just closes off where I started. And you can see that this is my post right here. I'm going to do another line from here to here. That's going to be the X that denotes the end grain. And then lastly, I'm going to do a circle right at the midpoint here, and we're going to go out 5 inches, and that's going to represent the 10-inch concrete that's sitting beneath it. Now, I'm going to copy this post around. I've made one. I'm going to copy it a bunch of times. Before I do that, I'm going to give myself maximum flexibility by saying post, and then picking a color for that. So we'll say our post, I'm going to make yellow. I'm going to go ahead and create a line for concrete, or a layer for concrete. So we'll go up and find this. It's going to be, we'll say red, and I'm going to make that a dashed line type or a hidden line type. We'll go hidden or hidden 2. I might change that in a minute. And then I'm also going to make one more layer for the end grain. And again, maybe too many things here, but I'm giving myself maximum flexibility to change these after the fact. Maybe I like the post color being yellow, but I want to change the end grain. If you just do a little work on the front end and put all these things on their proper layer, so my end grain, I can tell it's got that dashed line type. I need to change that. So end grain, we're going to change that back to continuous. Concrete's the only one that I want dashed. And then we'll put the post all on its own layer. So right down here. What this is going to allow me to do is get this whole piece set up. I could group them, but I'm just going to move it right now to the end of my project. Now, again, back to my sketch right here. I'm actually pushing that in 1 foot 7 inches, and so I might actually start to show that here. I think for my design, I decided that I was going to do 1.5 feet in. So I just grabbed this post. We'll say M space. I'm going to move it 1.5 feet, or actually no, that's which is 1 foot 6 inches right here. So 1.5 feet. Move this again, 1.5 feet, and it should move that over. I'm going to grab this and copy it down to the end of this line right here, and we'll do the exact same thing. So move it in 1.5 feet. Now if I go back to my chart, I spaced all these out. When I was adding this up, the maximum that I could space my post was 6 feet 6 inches, and if I did that and maxed it out, I would have this 2-foot piece left over here. And so I've got 44 feet. What I'm going to do is kind of work out that math for these right here. And there's a bunch of different options for it. I don't want to have just 2 posts sitting this close to each other. So I might offset 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, and then 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet, and put those 2 posts together in the middle. So let's do that. We're doing on center. So I'm going to copy, and I'm just going to copy over 6 feet, and then I'm going to type 12 feet, and should put that one there. Let's go and do 18 feet. We'll do the same here. Copy. I'll go 6 feet, 12 feet, and 18 feet. And so that by taking the 6 inches off and adding it 1, 2, 3 times, and then 1, 2, 3 more times, that gets me roughly 3 feet. This is probably a 5-foot gap maybe between these. We'll see, center to center, so 4'8". However you want to work this out, there's a lot of different ways to do it. This puts 2 posts that are closer in the middle. I'm just going to copy this up for demonstration purposes. What I could do here is space these out differently and just put a dimension for equal in here. So if we were to say I need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gaps in there, or 7 spaces, I would take this distance right here from the center of that post to the center of this post, which is 40 feet 8 inches divided by 7. So let's do this. Let's say 40 times 12 plus 8. That gives us 488 inches divided by 12 gives us 69.7 inches. It's a weird number, right? So that's why we're doing the dimensions that we have. But we could essentially offset these at 69.7 inches. And I'm just going to do that. So we'll say this. We'll copy it over. 69.7 inches, and then I'm going to grab and I'm going to copy from the center point here to the center point here, and you notice that it keeps dropping it off a little bit further down. Now, what is this doing? It is spacing them at, admittedly, an even number, but what it is doing is it's spacing it at an equal number, and they're roughly going to be the same all across there. Now when I do my dimensions in here, let's see, let's change our dim style to probably something close to what we're thinking. We'll just go 10 scale for now. When I do my dimension and I go from here to here, again, weird number, but what I'm going to do is just say EQ period, and I'm just going to make it equal for every single one of these dimensions across here, showing equal spacing. Either of these options will actually work. What I'm going to do, I'd probably go the equal route, but it might be smart to just really pick some numbers and just own those numbers there. Let's stick with the first one that we had. We've got this piece here. I know that I have a 44-foot long beam stretch right here. It's not one board, but it's going to be multiple boards that span over that. I actually am going to grab this beam. It's already on the beam layer, and I'm going to click and move it up. All right, now I want to snap to this space right here, and I got lucky. I grabbed it right where I needed to, but let's say you accidentally grabbed it over here. I would then grab it again and make sure you're grabbing all of it, including the end pieces of it. And I'm going to say M space and move it, type PER to snap to perpendicular, and I know that I've snapped it right to that post. Now, this happened to me, might happen to you. Where'd my beam go? It disappeared. Well, it's actually, if I pan around, I see it. So occasionally, you're going to have to come out, select the image, right-click, draw order, send back. And it should send it back, and I should see my beam again. Nope, just kidding. So I need to grab it here, and here, right-click, draw order, bring to front. one of those two is going to work. It's an annoying little thing in CAD. I'm going to go ahead and make this change because it's going to make my life easier. When I drew this, I probably should have used a polyline. So I'm going to type PE for poly edit. It's going to ask if I want to turn it into one. Say yes. And I want to join. So J space. And I'm going to click on all of this stuff here. It's not necessary that you join it, but what it's going to do is now it's one click to select this beam. And I'm going to copy this up, and we're going to move it up 6 inches, or I can just click and snap to perpendicular right there. And now I've put my beam on both sides. I'm going to delete that center line that was just a guideline. And I've got my first beam set. So I know that my next part of the project is out here. And I'm going to copy this up all the way to this point right here. Before I undo that, let's go back to my sheet and look. In this project, I started with 1 foot 7 inch inset to where the post is 1 foot and 7 inches in on the beams, which is where the decking is going to stop. I changed it in AutoCAD to 1.5 feet. Just makes more sense to do a nice even number there, even though the max I could get away with was 1 foot 7 inches. I want to do the exact same thing up top so that my post is actually 1.5 feet in from the edge of the decking out here. I want to do the exact same thing up here. So what I'm going to do when I grab this, I'm going to grab all of my decking and I'm going to copy it up. I'm going to grab it from the post and I'm going to put it right at the edge of the deck right there. Now I'm going to grab it again and I'm going to deselect by holding shift that white line right there. Whoops, I'll have to do that. Reselect the beam. And I'm going to move it down 1.5 feet. Now, again, hidden underneath there, I'm going to have to grab all this stuff, do that annoying thing where we select it all, draw order, bring to front. So what did I do there that's important to see? If I do a distance for this, from the corner of this post out to the edge of the deck, it is 1 foot 6 inches. And if I do it this direction to the edge of the deck, it is 1 foot 6 inches. I'm equally hiding my post in on the decking. Now what's different about this project is, and you have to show it in section, is that what I'm going to do is actually use joist hangers for my joist to tie into the ledger board, and then I'm going to use joist hangers to have them tie into this first beam set. On the second one though, I'm going to use joist hangers and have it cantilever over, and the joists are going to extend all the way out to the edge of the decking. And that way I'm able to pull in this particular post so that it gives more of the illusion of this sort of floating deck, and I can hide the post a little more underneath. Is it necessary? No, it's more of a design decision, and that's what I'm going to roll with. So let's start to put in the language for our joist in here. What I'm going to do is create my first joist from here to here, and just do it as a single line. I'm going to offset 2 inches. So in this case, just 2, and it defaults to inches. And now I have my first joist. Same thing we're doing with everything else. I want to grab this joist. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it joist. And I'm going to change that layer color to just something. I'm going to do it a different color for now, just so I can distinguish them. And move that to the joist layer. So that way I can distinguish them. I might go back and change it to the same line weight as beams down the road. In my drawing, I am setting these at 16 inches apart, right? In this project, they are, well, because it's a boardwalk, they're set on center, and it's 1 foot 9 inches. So as you're doing this, you're actually doing it not the space in between, the gap that's left in between, but you're doing it 16 inches on center. As I copy this over, I'm just going to go in the direction and type 16 inches, and it's going to set that right at 16 inches. As I do a dimension for this, and we'll do that in a little bit, I'm going to set that dimension, probably do, let's say, dim aligned, click on the outside, and go up. This is not sized appropriately, but I might even move it over 1 inch, just to have those tick marks, and the crosshairs line up right in the middle of it. We'll erase that for now because we've got a lot to figure out. As you move this over, there's a couple little tricks. I might copy this and then just from the outside to the outside and kind of get a few going. I then might grab a slew of them, right? 4 in this case, and copy from the one that I didn't select over here and then put it on the outside. And I might do this the rest of the way just to go about 4 times as fast. Each time making sure not that you're clicking on the inside, but wherever you picked it up, in this case on the outside of that joist, I'm going to the outside of this joist. Now what we're getting at is eventually we're going to have a situation, unless this just works out flawlessly, which I doubt it will, where we have this, right? So don't need these, but this joist right here hanging out on the end, just halfway. So what do I do about it? There's a couple things. I mean, the obvious piece is, cool, just move it in. And what we end up with is 16-inch spacing everywhere except for this one on the right side. I'm going to propose something different because sometimes it's not as close as this. Sometimes it's like halfway out. And what I'm going to do is figure out what the distance is. That's the overhang. In this case, I know it's 2 inches. And we're going to cut that in half. So whatever your distance is, cut it in half in space to move it over, and you're going to move it over 1 inch and hit enter. So what I'm doing now is I basically have my 16-inch spacing, which is typical for every piece in between, but on the outsides it comes down to a 15-inch spacing. So give some good symmetry to the project. I've created all of them here. I'm going to copy this, and we're going to pick it up right at that beam, and we're going to drop it off at this beam right here. And I will say EX for extend, click this line, and hit spacebar and extend that piece out all the way to the edge. Now I might come back and say MA for match properties, match that up to my joist layer, and then just TR space, come back in and trim this whole thing up so that you can start to get that line work for it. You get the idea. So we'll finish that up. Now, we're close. This is showing that that joist is going over and it's sitting on top of the beams, and then it kind of cantilevers over, gives us that same equidistant right there. And I think we're getting our framing done. Now, let's go back and look at our example. What are some things that we're missing? We need to put in blocking. And again, what you're going to do is probably just do, for a pattern like this, I would tend to alternate between halfway for one and then a third of the way for another. So let's do a quick distance right here. It is 11 feet 6 inches. So we're going to say, what is that divided by 3? So we'll do 11 feet times 12 inches plus 6 inches divided by 3 gives us 46 inches. So I'll offset 46 this direction. You can see where that polyline did something funky. And I'm going to put in a line right here and right here. And then I'll just delete these guidelines that are my offsets that I just used, this one and this one. And essentially what I've done is I've just put in some placeholders for blocking in here. And it could be that I even split the difference here. That actually makes a lot of sense if I were to do a line from here to here, and then now I'll put in another block. How you do blocking, especially over a large span like this, it's really necessary. I would probably, I'm beginning to think that we probably need to put one in right in the middle of this as well. So the longer the span, the more blocking you're going to want to put in. So I'm finding the middle of that gap right there and putting in the block right there. Trim that piece out, and I'm just going to grab this and mirror it over. So I'm trying to be really symmetrical with this, but maybe I'm just visually showing that we want to alternate between 2 blockings on this span and then 3 here, and then we'll jump back to 2. So let's offset these all 1 inch in either direction. That gives us a 2-inch board. And we'll get in and delete the middle lines in here. Lastly, I am going to just make these, we might as well, let's just go ahead and make one more layer for blocking. You're probably going to make it the same as the joist, and so if we just put it on that same joist layer, we know we're kind of locking it into that same color, but what I'm going to do is at least make it a different layer so that I have the option down the road to potentially change it. And we'll put it on the blocking layer. Changing the color off white just confirms that you've got it on the right layer. So similar to what we've been doing, we're going to copy it from here. Go parallel, and then I'm going to escape out of that copy. Oh yeah, one important thing to remember, right? We had 15 inches over here. We need to actually extend this to match up, because we're copying over that 15-inch piece, which is obviously a little screwy. So we need to move those over in the right place and extend these to where they're 16 inches, right? So 15-inch blocking on this outside spacing, and then we went 16, 16. And so now we're ready to pick this up. Let me trim it out. And we'll just do that, and copy, hit escape so we can grab more, and then copy again. There. Now, obviously overdid it with a few of these. Erase those, come in here, trim this out. And we could copy this same blocking approach up and send it to that top piece. Select all of these, copy them up. Last thing that we need to copy around, if we're using our example over here, is going to be the joist hangers. And so I'm going to get in and show a joist hanger. And to do that, I'm just going to offset or draw a line up this direction. We will go, in this case, probably 2 inches. It's more of a visual thing, so I'm going to go 2 inches this direction as well. And so I've got a 2-inch L, and I want to put it on its own layer. We'll call it a joist hanger. Let's go and create the other side here. We'll go 2 inches, and we'll do another 2-inch line this direction. So I'm going to highlight all of these, and I'm going to actually create a new layer. We'll call it Joist Hanger, and scroll to that layer right here. I'm going to make it blue just to make it really visible. I'm going to actually change the line weight for myself just so I can see it. I'm going to bump it up and make it a little thicker. And if you look down at the bottom, you should see these 3 lines. It'll show hide line weights, so that when I grab this and I put it on the joist hanger layer, it actually shows a little bolder, that blue that's right there. You can see the weight of it. So I'm going to grab this and begin to copy it around like everything else, right? Pick it up right here and move it over on this end. I'm just going to delete that line. What we'll do, use an inverted joist hanger that sort of will allow us to tack it on right there. And we'll grab all these. If you wanted to, you can type MI for mirror. I'm going to click this line and mirror out. So I'm clicking in the midpoint and not erasing the source object, and we'll send it down to the bottom. We'll use the same technique for sort of copying this piece around and these joist hangers all the way around, and we're going to flip them and put them on this side as well. So again, MI for mirror, you need to find a point halfway between this joist and this joist, which we know our this beam in this beam, our post in the center right here is going to do that. And I'll just pull directly out with my ortho on. Erase source objects, no, because I don't want to erase these. And it'll plop those joist hangers there. Now, do I need joist hangers here? I don't, actually, because my joists are then going to slide right over. And I might just put a note about nailing these or using some other type of hurricane tie that will connect the joist to the beam in that vertical sense right here. And so that's going to be the moves for getting this in. What I'm going to do is just quickly roll through and kind of finish out the rest of this by copying these pieces up and kind of finishing out and copying all the pieces around. All right, so we're at a good stopping point with the framing, and we've added in these hurricane ties that then connect to the beams to the joist. It's on the inside of all of this, and on this side we flipped it to where it's also on the inside here. Probably going to do some test prints to change the line weights of a few things here, but for the most part the framing is in a good spot. Now, what we want to do as far as the decking boards is begin to create a decking board for this area. We know that it needs to run parallel because it has to hit all of our parallel to the sidewalk so that it hits all of the joist. And what we want to do is begin to draw those in, show that the size of that board, and then begin to actually offset those boards in this direction, and then just trim out the line work that's underneath it. You don't want to cover up anything critical, so I might choose and isolate a particular selection right in here just to show those decking boards. We'll start by creating a new layer. I'm going to call it decking boards, and I'm going to change that color to some type of something different. I'm just choosing magenta at this point. That's going to be too heavy for the decking board, but I just want it to look different right now. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create that board just by running it and snapping a line from here all the way down. And we need to figure out the depth of that decking board, and it really is going to depend on what type of decking board you're using. I'm going to go back to previous slides and conversations where we're probably just going to go with a pressure treated 5/4 board, which is 5/4 inch thick, so an inch, an inch and a quarter, and then 6 inches by 12 feet. And so I'm going to use that board that comes 6 inches this way. Now, again, all of this is kind of visual. A lot of this is going to get figured out in the field, and those boards obviously aren't exactly 6 inches in width, but what we're going to do is we're going to grab this, and I'm going to deselect that endpoint. I just want to grab the decking board, and I want to copy it down from this point to here. And I've got a double line going, so I'm going to select this, and select one of these, and I'm going to move it down that extra 0.25 inches, or that 1/4 inch gap that we want to have in the decking boards. Additionally, beyond just the decking boards, I want to put in the screws. I'm just going to go all the way to the finish line here and not actually show in or just call that out in a note. I want to actually show the screws and put them on their own layer. To do that, I'm going to draw myself a guideline, and I'm going to show the screws will come in, say, 1.5 inches. You could just visually do this, but I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to go a little overkill here and show my two screws. At this point, we'll say 0.2. And we're going to copy this one and put it right at the same point. erase your guidelines. Ultimately, what you want to end up with is 2 screws that are just sort of sitting in that board. Let me erase those lines, and I want to put them on that layer that is decking screws. Or did I say decking board? Where are my screws? There they are. This is on these are still on layer 0. It's important to double check your layers. That's why changing colors is always really helpful. Make sure that you've got them on that decking board layer. Alright, so I've got my decking board in. I'm going to copy these screws over by snapping on the midpoint and pasting it at the midpoint since I'm at the end of my project. And then I'm going to grab all those decking screws together, and we're going to copy them from this top corner right here down to this corner right here. And so we've got the decking screws in there along with those decking boards, and they're all as one unit. And this is where I'm going to make my life a lot easier by clicking on one board line, one screw line, and saying lay ISO. And so when my lay ISO settings turn everything off, if yours don't, the way to do that is to type lay ISO and then hit type S for settings, and you're going to choose off as opposed to lock and fade. You can see it down here. If you just hit O space, it chooses off. And so now what I'm going to do is type lay ISO, click on this, and what it's going to do is turn everything off. This gives me the ability to grab that bottom board and all the decking screws, and if you hadn't picked up on the trend just yet, we are just copying a bunch of times. So I picked it up at a goofy spot to paste, but you get the idea. You're picking up, and so just to reiterate, I'm going to show this one again. Grabbing the decking board and all the screws, making sure that I'm just grabbing this one board. We're going to copy it from the previous board so that I can preserve that half or that 1/4 inch gap, and then I'm dropping it off at this board right here, and it preserves that little gap in there. And as long as you're consistent, it doesn't really matter where you pick it up, just as long as you're dropping it off at that same spot. You can move these boards down multiple times. Again, I'm going to grab all of this and go right here. Whoops, need to grab that. Sometimes you can just hold shift, deselect this stuff, copy it from that point, and come down this way. I'm quickly going to lay un-ISO. That gets me out of this, and I'm going to do that example that we saw back over here in our lecture slides where we kind of put that arcing piece into the decking boards, and I'm going to put it right here. I'm just going to go a little bit outside. I'm going to turn my ortho off. I'm going to turn my snaps off and kind of arc and then arc again. We'll go back to this and select that arc and say lay ISO. That way, forgot to get the board. So this line, and this screw, lay ISO. Now what I can do is just TR for trim, select these as my blades, hit spacebar, and just trim away. When it comes to these screws in here, I'm just going to grab this entire run, E space for erase. For these right here, erase. These right here, erase. And you get the idea. Put that all on the same layer, lay un-ISO. And I've got this set up where, as typical, I got to highlight all this, draw order, bring to front. and I've got my decking board shown in. Now it's a little chaotic underneath, and so you got a couple options of what you can do here for showing this stuff. One method is to simply get in here and trim and just eliminate everything that's underneath and know that you're going to repeat a few things up. And so I might get in here and just trim these lines and then come back and, using lay ISO, just grab the joist and just erase all of that right there, right? So now I just see the decking boards. Another method is to extend these lines down back after you trim them so that they're a separate line. And what we're going to do is just make a new layer, and we'll call it hidden. And this is just going to be everything as a hidden line type. And let's go to the hidden layer. So hidden line type, and I'm going to make it a really light gray color. So we'll go with that lightest one. And so that I could select these lines that are underneath the project, instead of them being on the joist, now they're back on hidden. They're going to be really light and subtle. This matches up, if you notice, we've got that hidden dashed line type for the blocking, for the joist under here. It's a really nice touch. It is frankly time consuming and to a certain degree frustrating, but I'm going to do it for this, and I think it's a good idea to actually pull this off. So I'm going to take the time to do it and just sort of jump ahead for this just to kind of show it. Making sure that I trim those lines, and now I'm just going to use MA for all of these pieces, blocking included, right? So in this blocking, I need to trim and then re-extend it. All right, so at this point, I think it looks pretty good. We've got the hidden line type for these boards underneath. We'll do some test prints, but before we do that, in a separate video, we're going to go through dimensioning, doing typical dimensions, doing labeling for all of these different components, how to begin to actually lay it out on our framing plan. So we'll do that in a separate video, but this is going to be really the bones for getting in your actual framing plan in AutoCAD.